This is Power Hour with Gabriella Power.
Hello and welcome to Power Hour. It's great to be back home. I've just returned from Israel where I took part in a study trip hosted by AJAC, and I'm not exaggerating when I say the 7 days I spent there changed my life. It's a country that is right now fighting for its existence. They're in a war not just with Hamas in Gaza or about to be with Hezbollah in the north, but they're fighting against the ferocious hate coming from all over the world as people every day openly call for the destruction of Israel. Now, I'll tell you what stood out to me while I was on the ground. Nearly every person I spoke with does not want war. They're furious with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for failing to secure the release of the hostages and to see more than 300 Israeli soldiers being killed while fighting. They want peace and they want a solution, and more than anything, they want their loved ones home. While I was there, I had the privilege of meeting a man by the name of Gal Dalal. He's my age, 30 years old, and on October 7, he took his 22-year-old brother Guy to the Nova Music Festival. He told me that Guy was so excited to go to his very first festival, he made sure he got there early so he could keep an eye out for him. And this festival was about celebrating, dancing to music, and having a great time with the people you love. Little did he know he was about to spend 9 hours hiding from terrorists armed with AK-47s who would go on to murder more than 300 innocent partygoers with big smiles on their faces. And his little brother Guy, who he says is his best friend in the world, was about to be kidnapped and thrown into a terror tunnel. This is what Gal had to say about the last morning he spent with his brother at the festival.
At 6:15, he was already waiting for me at the entrance, jumped at me, kissed at me, sent a selfie to our mother. He was so happy. He and his friends were so happy. And it was really a magical moment. You know, this festival, it was much more than a party or a rave. There were more than 20 different nationalities in this festival. You could see Arabs and Jews dancing together, celebrating peace and love. Spreading peace and love, celebrating life in the most magical way.
It's been almost 9 months now, and Gal and his family have no idea if Guy's dead or alive. Every day they're haunted by the fact that if Guy is alive, he's likely being subjected to physical and psychological abuse by terrorists. And despite the heartbreak that Gal is suffering every minute of every day, he's on a mission to bring his little brother home. And his story just really hits home for me. I'm so close with my little brother that the thought of something like this happening to him makes me feel so sick to my stomach. And I cannot imagine the rage we would all feel here in Australia if we were ever to experience an attack so barbaric at a peaceful, happy music festival on home soil. As we speak, there are more than 120 hostages being held in Gaza. It's believed 40 of them are no longer alive. But it seems people right around the world are happy to forget about the innocent people like Guy and the many other hostages that are still being held captive by Hamas terrorists, while protesters here in Australia, in America and in other parts of the world take to the streets chanting anti-Semitic slogans. And the people of Israel, well, they see that and they feel that and they are scared. Many of them are descendants of Holocaust survivors, and history has shown us what happens when there is enough hatred in the world against Jews. There is so much I could say about the kindness that the Israeli people offered me, the shock and the trauma that could still be felt at sites where innocent people were brutally murdered, and the hope that many people carry in their hearts that one day there will be peace. Before I move on, I want to leave you with this message from another brave and kind survivor of the Nova Music Festival, Shalev Bitton. He'd just returned to Israel after spending time in Melbourne days before October 7. He told me that he went to the festival to enjoy a party with his friends. But when he went to sleep that night, he woke up to the sounds of gunshots from outside his tent. And before he knew it, he was running from terrorists who shouted, "Where are the Jews?" as they tried to hunt him down. Now, he knows he's one of the lucky ones because he didn't die that day. And he says surviving something so horrific has allowed him to chase his dreams with a bit more power. And now he appreciates every day just that little bit more because none of us know when it's going to end.
I like to appreciate every moment in my life a bit more because you don't know when it will finish. You can't actually imagine because I thought in my mind that I'm going to a party with my friends. We discovered after a couple of hours that we are running for our life.
This time tomorrow, all eyes will be on the first US presidential debate. Fox News is reporting that Joe Biden and Donald Trump will be taking vastly different approaches. It's expected that Joe Biden is going to attempt to trigger Donald Trump, while the Republican candidate will rely on his extensive campaign experience. Joining us now is Based Politics podcast host Brad Palumbo. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. What can we expect tomorrow?
Well, we can expect a show, that's for sure. Donald Trump, if he's one thing, is an entertainer. And then Joe Biden has a lot to prove to the American public because a lot of people, including Democrats and independents, are really concerned about his ability to actually do the job of being president. We've seen him glitch and freeze and look confused. We've seen him call out to dead people or non-existent human beings on too many occasions to count during public events or ceremonies. And so he's got the most to prove here. All Trump needs to do, he's up in many polls. He's in a strong position. Trump just kind of needs to not mess anything up, not cause himself any problems, which, you know, with him, he could always say something unexpected. But Biden's the one who I think will really be scrutinized intensely to see, is he up for it?
Apparently, Joe Biden's team have scheduled frequent breaks during his preparation for this debate. They're trying their best to keep him sharp for this debate against Donald Trump. And the 81-year-old president and his close team have moved to Camp David for intensive practice sessions, gearing up for the first of two crucial debates. How nervous would you be if you worked for Joe Biden right now?
Well, I would have absolutely refused to let him on the debate stage. I would have said, we're not doing it. Make whatever excuse you have to avoid it. But one thing I noticed is that they were able to negotiate something unusual, which is there's going to be 2 commercial breaks during this 90-minute debate. And that's unusual. Historically, in general election presidential debates in the US, there are no commercial breaks. You just run through for 90 minutes. You'd think the leader of the free world should be able to just speak and answer questions from a podium with a glass of water for an hour and a half. You'd think that'd be no big deal, but they were actually able to negotiate for 2 commercial breaks and other rules that seem very favorable to Biden. For example, the other person's mic will be turned off while the other is speaking, which stops Trump from getting his jabs in or undercutting or throwing Biden off, which is something Trump's very good at. We saw him famously do that to Hillary Clinton on multiple occasions in 2016. So this debate stage seems to have been skewed to be as favorable as possible to Biden with some unusual accommodations. But I would still be very worried that he's going to refer to himself as a senator, refer to himself as vice president, reference a dead colleague who died years ago as if he's just spoken to them or as if he's just seen them, confuse world leaders that he's recently engaged with for ones that have actually been out of office or dead for years. I'd be very concerned that he'd be going to do that on the debate stage, but I guess it feels like he has to because things aren't going well for him, I guess. He feels behind in a lot of the polls, or that he's got to try to make a case to the people to show them he's not too frail or too old to do the job. So the onus really is on Biden.
I would argue that he's really failing to make that case, though, when there is so much concern around his age and his mental health. The fact that there are breaks in this debate, I think, really doesn't help. It really feeds into the narrative that, no, he's not up to the job.
It definitely does, but only if you know that that's unusual. And I guess because in the presidential primary debates, so the Republican primary and the Democratic primary, they have presidential debates, and it's fairly normal for there to be commercial breaks during those ones. But it's just the general election televised debates where historically there haven't been commercial breaks. So he might be banking on the fact that a lot of people won't notice that. I mean, heck, we have commercial breaks mid American football games here. So people are pretty used to commercials. So I think he's probably hoping that people don't notice that that's actually quite unusual.
Well, we are going to notice if there's another gaffe, which, look, I would put my money on that there probably will be. I don't know how long he can really last speaking until he stumbles and makes a mistake, but we will wait and see tomorrow. How crucial is this debate really when, of course, we know the 2 candidates so well, Donald Trump and Joe Biden? Is this a debate actually going to change the minds of voters?
Well, the impact of presidential debates is pretty limited, but it's definitely not zero. And the thing is, I think pretty much everyone agrees this is going to, especially with the electoral college system, it could be an incredibly close election. It could come down to just thousands of votes in a handful of swing states, like it famously did for Trump's 2016 victory. So in that kind of an environment where it's so razor thin, a moment from these debates where Biden looks confused or where he mixes up a name or refers to a dead person, which he just does all the time, that could actually hurt him. Whereas a couple months ago or a little while back, he gave a speech for the State of the Union where he was yelling a lot. There was a lot of bizarre substance to it, but he actually was, seemed to be present and alert for the whole thing. And it gave him a little bit of a boost because people were like, hey, okay, maybe he's not as far gone as I thought. If he could have a showing like that, obviously we have no idea, but if there's any way they could get him just for 90 minutes to lock in and seem fully present, maybe that could reassure people who are on the fence about voting for him. But honestly, if I were him, I'd be really concerned.
What are your thoughts on RFK Jr.? Should have he been allowed to join in?
Well, they notoriously make the rules very hard for a third-party candidate to get in because historically the people who've made the rules is a committee of Democrats and Republicans who can't agree on much, but can certainly agree that they don't want third-party candidates to be on that debate stage. And look, I disagree with RFK Jr. on many things. I agree with him on a few things, but I think having more voices and more perspectives is a good thing. So I would have liked to see him on the debate stage. I would have liked Americans to know that you don't only have two options this November. There's also going to be Libertarian Party candidates and Green Party candidates. So people do often forget about these options because in many ways, the US electoral system is heavily, heavily skewed by the two mainstream parties. The only time they can work together is to keep third parties out, basically. It's the only time they can ever agree on anything. So they set a very high bar that RFK Jr. doesn't appear to have met, but honestly, he got surprisingly close, which tells you the fact that he got 15% in any polls is really quite something we haven't seen in a long time for a third-party candidate. Yeah,
that's true. It shows you that there are plenty of Americans out there that want change. I want to get your thoughts on what's been exposed out of Disney. A senior figure has let it slip that the company won't hire a white male.
Certainly, there have been times where, there's no way we're hiring a white male.
Just kind of unspoken.
There are times when it's spoken, but
how would they say it?
There's no way we're hiring a white male. As far as Disney's concerned, I'm a white male, and that's not who they're looking to promote at the moment.
What's your reaction to this? Were you surprised?
Well, I wish I could say I was surprised. I unfortunately wasn't, but I certainly was horrified. Not only is this illegal and obviously immoral, it's wrong to discriminate against people because of their immutable characteristics in any direction, right? Whether it's the traditional discrimination or this new discrimination being done in the name of progress or wokeness or whatever, it's wrong. And it's actually also condescending and insulting to the minorities who are put in roles because many of them are probably perfectly capable of getting the job on their own merits, but instead they're being put in as tokens. And I think that's really insulting. And ultimately, look, I think most Americans want to live in an America like MLK Jr. famously talked about, right? Where people are judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. This kind of stuff, even if it's being done in the name of racial justice, doesn't take us closer to that. It reinforces the fact of race as a meaningful division between us and fuels intergroup resentment. But unfortunately, it's somewhat common. I mean, surveys of hiring managers show a alarming percentage think that this kind of DEI approach that is in many cases anti-white male and discriminatory in different ways is something, it's not just one instance at Disney. It's unfortunately becoming something of a common practice in businesses run by woke ideologues.
Well, it's good to see that this is actually being leaked and being exposed because, look, I'm all for equality. I want every female to have the exact same rights as every male, but I don't believe that white men should be discriminated against, and this is what we're seeing, and it's quite concerning that companies are jumping on the bandwagon because it's woke, and it's quite dangerous. Look, I want to get your thoughts on Julian Assange. He spent his first night in Australia as a free man, bringing his 14-year legal ordeal to an end. The WikiLeaks founder pleaded guilty to one charge of conspiracy and was sentenced to the time he'd already served in prison. What's the reaction been to this in the United States?
Well, it's really divided opinion, but I think on one hand, you have people who look at the fact that he exposed, unequivocally, he exposed U.S. war crimes that the government covered up, that nobody was ever held accountable for. And then you see this guy who some consider a journalist, some do not consider a serious journalist, but who published and revealed this information, and I will say did so in a reckless and haphazard way in many instances, right? He didn't take the kind of care that you see many journalists take to redact sources' names, to preserve intelligence. Yeah. He just dumped it all out there. But there's also, so I can see the criticism of that. However, he's also been prosecuted under a law, the Espionage Act, that many First Amendment advocates believe is an unconstitutional law and should be challenged in court. And he spent years of his life in various forms of prison or purgatory for revealing war crimes where people were killed, where no one was ever actually held accountable for those. That has always struck a lot of Americans as a perverse injustice, and I can see why, even if Julian Assange is hardly, you know, a perfect stand-up guy or a heroic figure in my books.
Based Politics podcast host Brad Palumbo, great to have you on Power Hour. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
All eyes will be on US President Donald Trump and Joe Biden tomorrow when they take to the stage for their first presidential debate. Overnight in England, Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer went head-to-head in their final televised debate before Brits head to the polls next week. Here's a snippet of two politicians giving, well, vague answers on a topic which has been overshadowing the election campaign, a betting scandal.
If you've acted now on those to withdraw support from those two Conservative candidates, what did you find in that investigation?
Well, Michelle, you know there's an independent investigation which is ongoing, which is why I can't say anything further about that.
You know that none of your other candidates have placed similar bets?
Well, I've made clear to my candidates what the standards are.
Joining us is Boss Lady and Small Business Women Australia CEO Amanda Rose. Amanda, great to be with you again. Looking at that and politicians all around the world, what's with our leaders? Do we have a leadership crisis?
Yes, we do. I think we've had a leadership crisis for quite some time. And that's because a lot of people want to lead because it's prestigious and there's power and people are, are power hungry, but no one wants to do what leadership, true leadership requires, which is doing the right thing, regardless if people like you or not, and sticking to your values, regardless if people are throwing money in your face. So it'd be really refreshing to have people with good quality character leading a country anywhere.
Just looking at that clip and you hear the answer, oh, there's an investigation, I can't comment on that. That's all I heard in 2020 when we had Dan Andrews in power in Melbourne. Oh, I can't comment on that, I'll give you a different answer. And it doesn't give the public any faith in our leaders. They're not being transparent.
No, and they get away with it. Let's face it. Who has been brought to justice, right, in relation to anything that happened in COVID or anything before that? There's a whole range of things across the world that have been absolutely horrific and they just don't talk about it. And what's scary is that the independent journalists or anyone that's trying to talk about it, they silence. And that really should be the red flag. Yes, you don't like what leaders say, but when you want to ask questions and call out the hypocrisy or if someone is covering up something and you're genuinely asking it, that person gets silence. That's worrying.
What is giving me faith, though, is that people are expressing what they have to say on platforms such as X, on digital shows, where you can have a lot more freedom to actually say what you think, what you believe, without being shut down. Right. So looking at the leaders around the world, we've got Joe Biden. Great. We have Rishi Sunak. We have Benjamin Netanyahu. A lot of Israelis out there are really fed up with his leadership as well at the moment. To prepare ourselves, if things aren't going to change, if there's not going to be a big shift, if we are going to have, say, Joe Biden as a leader of the free world for the next 4 years, what can people do? How can we arm ourselves when we essentially don't have great leaders to follow?
I think it's looking for an alternative. So we've been doing that. So in Australia, it's quite good. America, they did that with Trump originally. He was the alternative.
Yeah.
And now he's not, to be honest. But really looking at independence, asking those hard questions, and don't dismiss people on social media or in digital platforms that get labelled conspiracy theorists. You know, it's a word that people use, or right-wing extremists or left-wing, whatever they want to use. Put that aside and actually ask questions and listen. Say, do I believe this person anymore? If not, vote another way. Push back in the way that you can, which is going to your local member or, you know, at the polls, vote a different way, support the independents or support an alternative to the person that's currently there.
And get more involved. I like that. Let's talk about RFK, the independent in America, because he's not going to be taking part in this debate tomorrow. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, interesting how the two major parties, usually in any country, hate each other, but they don't hate each other as much as they hate a third-party threat. And that is what's happening here. So, you know, CNN said that you had to qualify with 4 polls that reached, you know, 15% or above. He actually did reach that, but what they did is they threw out one of the polls for some technicality, which was not legit, purely so he wouldn't be included on the debate. And this here is what people are sick of. This is why when you go online, you'll see so many people supporting him more now purely because of the pushback, just like how people supported Trump when they were pushing back on him. So I don't know if they realise what they're doing, but people are now preferring RFK because they feel that they've been ignored by the rest.
Yeah, maybe it's actually helping his campaign because he is going to be answering some of these questions that are taking place at the debate, and that is going to be streamed online and will be posted on X. So can you imagine maybe tomorrow people
one's watching the real debate?
Yeah, people might be switching off CNN and just going on social media.
That's right. It's not fair, and that's really what people want. So, you know, it's good to have opposing views. It's good to have discussions, but fairness, that has just disappeared, you know, and that power hungry, blocking out someone who's independent, blocking out the community and blocking out the people's choice is a dangerous thing to do.
It's absolutely dangerous because whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. It's a debate. That's where they debate these.
It's supposed to be democracy.
It's supposed to be democracy. Look, Julian Assange, he has returned home. He's, of course, a controversial figure, but I have a feeling about where you might stand on this issue. What's your assessment of Julian Assange finally being allowed to return home after that plea deal?
Look, I think it's fantastic, right? And I think what it should do is start encouraging discussions and very serious discussions in the community, in the journalist community, but also at schools and universities, because what it's saying is don't be a whistleblower. Don't, you know, let out information that the government doesn't want you to. Yes, there is security concerns with some information. I understand that. But you can't use that as an excuse all the time to silence people. And we see everywhere that if someone sees evil or there's something that is corrupt or something they feel needs to be brought to light, people should be free to be able to do that without being punished. Because if not, then we're saying that the top elite, whether it's politicians or people with money, can get away with what they want.
Get away and can continue to get away with it. It's funny, I saw a post on X earlier today saying it's amazing some of the government figures that are all of a sudden supporting Julian Assange, although they're pretty quick to shut down a lot of debate.
Well, that's exactly right. So this all comes down to, why are you in a position of power? If you're there because you want to do deals and do the wrong thing, we need to clean house. And this should be the beginning of that. We really need to have, I'd love to see independent investigations of every single politician in every single country, and start with Australia, maybe America.
Bring it on.
Absolutely, because what they do is they silence people, they threaten people, and they can't keep using national security as an excuse to shut down someone who's calling out behaviour that is potentially vile.
Amanda Rose, so great to be with you. Thank you for joining us once again on Power Hour.
Thanks.
This time next week, the people of Britain will head to the polls to vote for their next Prime Minister. The latest poll has found the Reform UK party holds a narrow lead over the Tories. According to the Redfield and Wilton survey, Nigel Farage's party is 1 point ahead of the Tories on 19%. Joining us from London is finance and geopolitics expert Dr. Roger Gewab. Dr. Roger Gewab, great to be with you. What do you make of this polling? Is it accurate, and can I get your feeling on the ground?
They're saying that these new polls, these MRP polls that they've started using, Gabriella, are far more accurate than old polls for two reasons, I think. First of all, the scientific techniques, which I'm sure must include some element of AI, artificial intelligence. And secondly, the samples are much, much larger. I mean, the usual polls in the UK by the major polling companies are 1,000, 2,000. I think I've seen very rarely 3,000, 4,000 people. This latest poll is apparently 19,000 souls voting. So they're supposed to be much more accurate. Yeah, they predict that it will be a Labour landslide with 450 seats for Labour, about 60 for the Tories, the Conservatives. The opposition party will be 70-odd seats. And pardon me, Nigel Farage's Reform Party will actually have 18 seats. It's the biggest wipeout of the Tories since 1900, but they do caution that things can change. And for example, tonight we had the final debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer for 75 minutes. And Sunak seems to have done better, although I was just amazed. Aren't people incredible at how they just didn't answer questions? They just obfuscated and skirted the answers, and yet the studio audience was applauding them. The hostess tried to nail them, but they wouldn't answer.
Yeah,
so
I think if you're a good politician these days, you just have to master spin. If you can avoid answering questions, then people applaud you. That seems to be the case. As you say, it's widely expected that the Conservative Party will lose at this general election. So what does the future look like for the Tories and Reform UK after July 4?
I think that the future for the Tories, I mean, their goose is cooked. I don't think they'll come back. I was saying the audience applauds, and you were saying, yeah, that's what happened. But I mean, they may applaud, but I don't think anybody's buying this stuff. You know, they really don't. I think the Tories will all but disappear for some years. It could be decades. It could be generations. They've really done everything they could to implode, to the point where I get emails and posts telling me nobody can be this stupid. This is some kind of a plot. This is some kind of conspiracy to sink themselves and bring the country, I mean, I don't know, from Mars or something. It's incredible stuff. But I think they're gone. The Reform Party, I think, is going to have a difficult time, because even with their 18 seats, our first past the post system means that only the Tories or Labour can really get in power. So Reform is going to sit there, and as much as Nigel would like to be the opposition, this poll said the opposition will be, with 70-odd seats, the Liberal Democrats. So I think Reform is just kind of going to sit there. It's pretty bleak, and therefore I am issuing a press release in the morning reminding people basically that last week, on British breakfast and Sunday politics television programs, I made the proposal that the Tory party should admit defeat and hand the keys to Nigel and the Reform and let them take over, let Reform merge into the Tories, and together they could actually defeat Labour. I mean, it's very wild. It probably won't happen, but I have had a groundswell of people telling me, go, Roger, go. I mean, such an amazing amount of support for that idea, because it's our last chance before we fall into what they're calling Starmergeddon.
Have you spoken to Nigel Farage about this? How does he feel about taking over the Tories?
I haven't. I WhatsApp Nigel, and he usually answers me quickly, but I'm still WhatsApping him, but I haven't heard back from him. I imagine, and mutual, people who know us both have said to me, he's probably getting 10,000 WhatsApps and 100,000 emails a day, and I doubt he or any of the Reform High Command, really have a chance to read anything. But he's probably heard of what I'm doing. I don't know whether he approves or not, but I'm just doing this because even though it's kind of dramatic, albeit pragmatic, I want it on record. If we end up, in the next 5 or 10 years in misery, I want it on record that there was an option available, but our political leaders didn't explore it.
So next election, as Nigel Farage is kind of creating this momentum now for potentially running again next time around, do you see him being the leader of Reform UK, or do you see him taking over the Tories?
Yeah, that's a big point, and I'm not sure that Nigel is happy with me for what I've said, but I basically said I don't see either of those. I'm sorry, one journalist has called me the irrepressible Dr. Roger Gill, but I have to say what I think. I think that Nigel is going to have a very difficult time building tiny reform into the opposition when it's already the Lib Dems. But as far as taking over the Tories, I really don't think he or anybody else that breathes could work with the people running the Tory party and telling them how to change it and letting them let me lead. I just don't think he'd sit for 5 years and stand for that. I don't think anybody would. I certainly wouldn't. I think he will go to America and work with Donald Trump, where he's a media star as well as here, and he can have a wonderful life and a wonderful career. I just don't think anybody could stand 5 years of watching Labor do what everybody fears they're going to, well, not everybody, not their supporters, but what people who don't support them, which apparently is a large number of people, are going to do to this country, because we already see it. Increased tax beyond the highest taxes we've had in 70 years, increased immigration, back to the EU after reverse Brexit in all but name. A lot of things that, many people don't want. And I don't think Nigel could just sit there, or I certainly couldn't. I don't think anybody could just sit there, watch that all happen and try to reverse it all on their own, especially with the Tories who hate him and wouldn't let him do anything anyway. That's why they need to give him the keys right now, or go out of existence.
Well, it's an interesting point, and we'll look at what's been dominating the headlines in the lead up to this election, and it's really been a betting scandal. A Conservative politician has become the fifth party figure to be investigated by the gambling watchdog for allegedly placing a suspicious bet on the general election date. Look, is this taking away from the important conversation around the key issues?
No, the latest is the Labor guy who laid a bet against himself.
Right.
He bet that he would lose.
Well, either way, what does it tell you about politicians and the people the people in the UK are funding?
Yeah, absolutely. It tells us what our current class of politicians is like, which is rubbish. And you could see it.
Is that worldwide or just in the UK?
I did an interview with Nigel Farage some months ago. If you want to Google my surname and his, you'll see the interview where I said, why do we have such bad politicians in the West all over the place? And he answered it with some very interesting answers, which are in that video, which you can see, and I'll touch on in a second. But to answer your question about the effect, you just had to watch tonight's debate, Gabriella. So much time was taken up talking about this betting stuff when they should have been discussing the issues of crucial concern to this country. I mean, enough already. It was just terrible watching that.
Why do we have such, I can't remember the word, you described it, but essentially awful, rubbish was the word, rubbish politicians in power? Why is it? Do people not care about the country? Do they care about themselves?
Yes, yes, and yes. I asked Nigel, and he said, it is because we used to have politicians who had made it on their own. Truman, Eisenhower, Trump, Berlusconi, people who had accomplished something in life and wanted to put something back. And they didn't need the approbation of the public. They'd already made their spurs. Whereas today, almost across the board, almost in every nation, we have professional politicians who put their career first. And that's what it's all about. And they have no experience. They don't understand what the people want. And everything is about them maintaining power and getting reelected. That's why we're where we are, he said.
I want to talk to you about what's been happening in Israel. Israel's Supreme Court has ruled unanimously that ultra-Orthodox seminary students must be drafted into the military. So this ends their long-standing exemptions after a legal arrangement allowing the practice expired. Look, I was just in Israel and this was a big sticking point for people there while everyone else had to watch their brother and sister, their daughter, their son go off to war. What's your assessment of this decision?
Well, these are long-standing issues. And of course, besides the ultra-Orthodox, the 21% of the Israeli population that are Israeli Arabs are also not required to serve, but nobody's making an issue out of that. Some do serve, actually. Many of them do serve, but much of the 21% of the Arab Israeli population of Israel is not required to serve in the army. And the ultra-Orthodox Jews are not required to serve in the army. And their argument is twofold. One argument is that if they were exposed to the army, they'd be exposed to, people of the opposite sex, because, of course, both men and women, boys and girls serve in the Israeli army. They'd be exposed to members of the opposite sex or same sex, whatever. And music and dancing and alcohol and all the things they're not supposed to do, which would take away from their religious Torah studies. And the other argument, of course, on the part of these ultra-Orthodox, terribly religious people is that Israel is alive and what it is today because of the devotion of these people to constant study of the Torah, the holy scriptures, and that mustn't be interrupted with it. I don't think many Israelis would disagree with that part, but it is getting sort of tense, and it provides a real problem for Netanyahu because he's got two factions of his coalition who are these ultra-Orthodox sects. So it's raised its head by this Supreme Court judgment ruling right in the middle of the negotiations to draft a new bill. The conscription bill has expired, and they were going to come up with a new bill which solved this problem. But before they could, the court issued this ruling, has thrown it all into disarray and put pressure on Netanyahu, made it very difficult to hold his coalition together. So I don't know how it's going to turn out, but the real issue is the military needs more people.
Yeah.
It's got 2 wars going on, and maybe things need to change. That's the attitude.
I want to ask you about Julian Assange. He has arrived home in Australia for the first time in 15 years. What does his future look like? Are we going to see more secrets being exposed?
I don't know. I've been on a lot of programs about Julian Assange. I mean, first of all, I'm pleased that he was freed. The poor guy has suffered enough. Good grief. And the big debate is, will he go back to leaking and publishing information? I mean, I think given the politicians we were just talking about and all the scandal and skullduggery and criminal behavior and everything else going on, I mean, we certainly could use some leaks, Gabriella. So
yeah.
I don't know whether he'll settle in Australia and get active again. I have a feeling from the followers of his that I've come across on various television programs, that they're going to push him to do exactly that. Whether he's up for that with the health problems he's had and the years and the fact that he's now past his sell-by date as a leaker, as a publisher, but I mean, he could get right back into it tomorrow morning, I'm sure. And, you know, we could use some exposure of, because when he leaked, I don't think there was stuff going on in our political leaders as there is now.
Interesting point. Well, we'll have to watch this space very closely. We are less than 24 hours away from the first US presidential debate, Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. Have you got the popcorn ready? Are you excited? Is it going to be a disappointment? What's your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on some very big programs, on some very big networks, minutes after the debate ends, talking about it tomorrow, Friday morning. And I've got the popcorn. I'm very excited. I'm wondering, Sleepy Joe did hold his own on the State of the Union message, but I just don't know how he's going to hold his own on this debate. Trump has been refining his strategy and his message over the last week or two very carefully. And I mean, it should be quite a show. Now, it should certainly put Sunak and Starmer, who were so boring. I mean, my wife was sitting there screaming, "Enough already! Shut up!" You know, it should put them to shame, and it should be very interesting. I don't know who will win. I would imagine Trump, and then of course, a lot of commentators have said that if Joe does have what they call the quote senior moment unquote, that could be a huge game changer.
Yeah, well, he's had a few senior moments and it doesn't appear to be a game changer yet. We just keep seeing them on repeat, but we'll see if it makes any difference now that he's on a debate stage with Donald Trump. But Dr. Roger G. Weld, great to speak with you.
You too. Thank you, Gabriella.
Thank you. Princess Anne's husband has provided an update on the Princess Royal's health as Anne remains in hospital after being injured by a horse. Riley Sullivan is a reporter here at skynews.com.au and he's always across the latest headlines from the royal family. Riley, great to be with you. Princess Anne is in hospital 4 days on after being kicked by a horse. What's the latest on her condition?
Right, well, this was quite scary news, I think, for everyone. Obviously, Anne was at her home, Gatcombe Park, on Sunday. And it's understood that she was injured by a horse. We're not particularly sure exactly how it happened or unfolded, but it is clear that it was quite a serious incident. An air ambulance was actually dispatched to Anne's home to possibly airlift her out of there. Turns out it wasn't that serious. She was able to travel via ambulance. But yeah, it's been 4 days now. She's still in hospital. Her husband, Sir Timothy Lawrence, he's come out. He said that she's doing better, but for the time being, she's in hospital.
Oh, goodness. Another health scare for members of the royal family, all sending her our thoughts and prayers and hoping she recovers quickly.
Absolutely.
Look, some other royal news. This week, a new biography on David and Victoria Beckham, who I love, shone a light on Meghan Markle's friendship fallout with the former Spice Girl. I cannot wait to hear about this. What did it reveal?
Right. Well, this was Tom Bower. And if anyone who likes celebrity biographies, royal biographies, Tom Bower's always very juicy. He also did a really juicy book a few years ago on Meghan and Harry. So he definitely knows that world and he knows their world. This new book on the Beckhams, it's called House of Beckham. It's very juicy. It really goes into detail about not only the fallout between Meghan and Victoria, but also how the Beckhams and the Sussexes met. But one of the biggest shocks was that Victoria, you know, obviously she runs her own fashion line. You know, she has this huge business. And at one point there was discussions between Meghan and Victoria about, hey, why don't you know, supply me with some free clothes, free merch, and
Meghan wanted the free merch?
Yeah, so Meghan, you know, this was again during the time when she was still a working royal, so probably could have, you know, probably bought it herself. She asked Victoria for some clothes and you know, at this point, Meghan is at the peak of her celebrity as a newly minted Duchess, and Victoria sent her a lot of clothes and they collaborated on looks, but apparently in the end, it really didn't do much for Victoria's business. But the other sort of story to come out from
What about supporting her friend and actually paying up?
Right, well, that's the thing about the Sussexes. I think they like things comped. Like, I don't think they want to be,
it appears that way.
out. Right. But another funny thing in the book was that apparently Meghan kind of felt when she became the Duchess of Sussex that kind of put her a stratosphere above maybe the Beckhams, who are obviously they're showbiz royalty and they're celebrities and they're sporting royalty, but they're not necessarily royals. But then, you know, as time went on, I think that created tension in the friendship with Victoria. And then I think Meghan as well, and this is something that a lot of insiders have said, as she settled into the role as a royal, she came to realise that it wasn't all about jet setting in mansions, you know, and then so to be friends with the Beckhams and see their lifestyle and the extreme wealth, I think was did cause tension in the friendship.
It's ironic because even though David and Victoria are not royals, they're far more popular than Harry and Meghan. But look, speaking of Meghan Markle's father, Thomas Markle, has spoken out this week and publicly begged the Duchess of Sussex to allow him to meet his grandchildren. What did Thomas Markle have to say?
Right, so Thomas Markle, you know, we haven't heard from him in a little while. At one point he was doing a lot of tell-all interviews, talking to the press all the time, 60 Minutes, you name it, but he really has quietened down lately. But again, he's come out, he's spoken to the Daily Mail and he's given a tell-all. He's said that he is sad, you know, he's in failing health, he's about to turn 80, and he's never met his grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet. He hasn't seen Meghan since before the wedding. He's never met Harry. And it was sort of one last kind of ditch effort in the media to beg Meghan to see him. But, you know, I felt reading it at first, I thought, oh, you know, this is so sad. This is a man, you know, in the twilight of his life wanting to reconnect with his daughter. But then you sort of look at some of the things he did and I kind of can relate to Meghan, you know. There's a lot of discussion now around like cutting off a toxic parent and the, you know, and the awkwardness of it. But yeah, I can understand. I don't think this is going to move Meghan either way. I don't think this will change anything for her. But it's definitely sad news.
I agree with you, and I'm torn on that issue too because unfortunately Thomas Markle made some pretty big mistakes and he made them publicly, and unfortunately those are the consequences. So
and not only that, I mean, he's also supported, you know, his other children, you know, Meghan's half siblings, and they've been absolutely terrible to Meghan. So, you know, from her point of view, I'm sure she probably looks at her half siblings and her father and just says, I'm out.
Yeah, look, we've been, you know, I've been so critical of Meghan, as many of us have, and you know, she's far from perfect, but I do feel for her on this one because it's pretty awful to have family drama played out in the public. But then again, she has no issue with, you know, rubbishing the royal family and making money from it from Netflix. Maybe that runs in the family. Look, finally, royal fans were delighted to see Princess Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, make an appearance at Royal Ascot recently with Prince William. What do we know about Carol's relationship with her son-in-law? Right, well, this was quite a heartwarming moment. Carol Middleton is sort of the matriarch of the Middleton family. She's very much in William's life a mother figure. Obviously, William and Harry lost their mother at an early age. And I think William's always been drawn to the sort of normalcy of the Middleton family. They're a very close-knit family. They're a little bit more down to earth. I think he likes that. But on the flip side, and seeing someone like Carol at Ascot, it shows that they're also very comfortable in those, you know, royal circles as well. Yeah. So I think that Carol Middleton's really a touchstone for the Prince of Wales of normalcy and grounding and as the grandmother to his children. But also I think that they have quite a strong bond between them. Riley Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us on Power Hour. Great to speak with you. Thank you. You too. That is it for Power Hour. Thank you for your company. We'll see you next week. Make sure you subscribe to Sky News Australia on YouTube.